The second transformation is a transformation in the architectures of communication, if you like. And our counterpoint is classical classroom discourse. And our kind of reference point for this is Courtney Kasdan, who worked with us on the Multiliteracies project all those years ago, who wrote a classic book called Classroom Discourse. And the way she analysed classroom discourse is something like this. The teacher asks a question, which is initiate. The student responds, and then the teacher evaluates. IRE, initiate, respond, evaluate. So we've got here a little example where they might ask, what's the last planet in the solar system, and all the kids put up their hands, and the teacher picks out one student, and the student says it's Pluto, and then this teacher says, yes, that's right. So there's a kind of a game going on here, a discursive game, and the discursive game is one about guessing what's in the teacher's head. There's only really space for one answer. If it's wrong, maybe we'll go to a second one, but it's about getting that answer right. But also there's a couple of kind of sort of time and space aspects to this as well. The space aspect is you've got to be in the same classroom at the same time, you know, in the same room. It's got to be at the same time. That's the time aspect. And there's a kind of a, you know, they're the only conditions under which this works, and one person talking at a time. So what I'm trying to do is do a very brief analysis of this classical relationship of teachers to learners in classroom discourse. What I'm showing you now is some images about the way in which we reconfigure that in Scholar. So here's my profile. I belong to lots of communities, which are the different classes that I'm involved in and other things that are happening in my world. I have peers, so you know this is a kind of a social media space. There's an activity stream down the middle, and in a world of you know, of education, we don't want friends. That's absolutely the wrong metaphor. We don't want followers. That's an even worse metaphor because it's not a popularity contest to be in a classroom. We want peers who are going to be discussing things with each other and sharing knowledge with each other. Now, when I go to make an update, this is linking back to our first point, by the way, which is the multimodality point, immediately a big box comes up. I can make the box smaller if I want to. I can make it larger, but it's a big box. So immediately we're suggesting the opposite of a tweet, the opposite of a Facebook post. We're suggesting you write something which is a bit more expansive, but also you can put all sorts of media objects in the middle of what you're writing. You can put a video, you can upload a video, you can embed external media, which might be a video if it's on YouTube, it might be a bit of code if it's in GitHub. Any external media object you can upload in there. You can put in math, symbols, data sets, files, all sorts of stuff. And this again is multimodal writing, but it's of a kind of a lightweight variety where I, as the teacher, or each of the students can talk to the rest of the class and present things for classroom discussion. Also, by the way, one thing I should mention is that you know this can also feed to Facebook and Twitter, which again are not very good places for doing education. It's a clutter of all sorts of mutually incompatible things. But when you get the tweet or when you get the Facebook feed and you click on that, it brings you back to here for the serious thinking work. Now here is a classroom in Wisconsin. This is a group of grade 6 students, unbelievably doing Shakespeare in grade 6, doing the Comedy of Errors. And this is their activity stream. So there are a number of members in the class. They're on the left. The admins are the teacher, and we're looking in there as well because we're watching what happens in this class. Here's one bit of classroom discussion about analysing language. So the teacher makes a post to the class, comes up in everyone's activity stream. They click on it, and here's what the teacher asks them to do. Analyse patterns in language, you give an example. And here is the class talking about that example. They're all making comments, they're putting in little examples, and they're talking to each other as well. There are little @ symbols in there. And when they go to the bottom, the next student can add the next comment. There's a little button there where you can press the button and you can add a comment. So this is classroom discourse. This is what Courtney Kasdan was talking about, isn't it? Well, it is that and nothing else, but it's a lot, but actually, you know, a lot of things have changed as well, and I want to show you what some of those things are that have changed. And here's another example. So that was a classroom of grade 6 kids. This is Mary and my assessment for learning class. Certain number of members in the class. There are admins there, which include our teaching assistants and a couple of people working with us on various research projects. In this class, we have actually asked the participants not just to comment on our posts, and the posts are little videos like this one that we're making now, but also we've asked them to make inputs themselves, like give us an example of something, we say. Make an update in the class whereby you contribute something. And look, in this case, Mary and I had never heard of Plickers before. The minute you start valuing the knowledge of students, they bring stuff to bear which no teacher knows about. So this is an example here of a student-initiated update. And here are the other participants of the class talking to that student about their update. What's interesting about this is that it is just what Courtney Kasdan was talking about: initiate, respond, evaluate, right? It's it is classroom discourse in that classical sense. And it's also completely different. And look, let's be kind of a little bit provocative about this. In a lot of ways, it's actually a lot better than classroom discourse. Firstly, everybody responds, and we can say everyone must respond. We don't want just one person to answer and to be a proxy for the rest of the class. And by the way, I have a pretty bad theory about this. The person who puts up their hand very keenly to give the answer is always the wrong person to be answering anyhow. It's a problem having one person responding. Who is that person? But then importantly now in these environments, we can say, let's talk about it, but let's all talk about it. That also there are lowered barriers to response. So in the research that Mary and I have done with students in classrooms using this environment, down the bottom of the activity stream is that little box with comment where you can type something in and press comment. And students have said, look, I'm nervous to speak normally in a class. I'm a bit shy. But seeing other people already talking, seeing what they're saying, having just a few seconds to think about my response before I press the comment button, that gives me more confidence. I feel more comfortable in this environment. So that helps the kind of student who isn't the one who puts up their hand keen to answer in the way that the other classroom discourse does. The third point is the texts are actually different. Remember, we're talking here about artifacts. So oral language and written language are very, very different from each other. Strings of clauses, lots of redundancy in orality, lots of sort of self-correction. You make these self-corrections and these stumbles, but in fact you've already said it. Whereas written, you can delete things, you can look forward, you can go back over things, and what happens is much less, much tighter, much more carefully reasoned, much more carefully thought, much better formed. Text is actually put in these little boxes. Even though it's classroom discourse, it's actually a form of writing, and the telltale is sentences. Full stops or periods at the end of the sentence, capital letters. This is, and in a sense, that's what we're wanting. We want this intermediary space between thinking and writing in the more formal sense that writing that writing exists. The next point is then that when everyone responds, learner differences become visible and valuable. So, in that Shakespeare example, you'll see that all the students were giving their own little examples, talking to each other, getting ideas from each other. When one person puts up their hand to give the answer, there's a single assumed answer that the teacher is expecting. It's the game of guessing what's in the teacher's head. Whereas in this case, there can be differences. And go back to our little Pluto example. In fact, Pluto is controversially these days perhaps not a planet, and there might be other things which are the size of a marble, which are planets technically in terms of the definition of a planet, and we might have a discussion about that. So it means that knowledge is less about right and wrong answers, less clear-cut. The fifth point is that it's highly engaging. My goodness, what a lot of text is coming through there. What a lot of comments are being made. And by comparison, listening to one person's answer, thinking slower than the speed of speech, and it's boring just to be listening, is not very engaging at all. Whereas here we've got a kind of cognitive intensity which about fits with the way social media operates. There are a lot of posts on Twitter and Facebook and whatever, and we've got used to skimming through them and being engaged by virtue of the density of the material being presented to us. The next point is we have this mix of read and write. So in other words, if you think, and what we mean read and write there as a metaphor, you know, they talk about read-write as something that you do with disks and storage media, but we actually mean read and write, and we also mean speak, listen and speak. So, you know, that in a normal classroom, each person doesn't get much chance to speak. Whereas in this particular environment, there's a lot of writing going on as well as a lot of reading. So there's a different kind of mix of active communication as opposed to passive reception. The seventh point that we're making here is that in fact, while classical classroom discourse required that you were confined in time and space, that you were in the same four walls at the same time, in the same square, the cell of the timetable, that with this, it doesn't matter. We can do it live in a classroom, or we can do it overnight. So the discussion that we're going to have, you can say, okay, let's do the discussion now. Or we can say, well, let's do it overnight. The interesting thing about let's do the discussion now is even that ends up very different. So if you're in a classroom or a lecture theatre and we're doing it live, you know, this person beside you is the only person you could normally speak to, you know, the technique of turn to the person beside you and talk to them. But in fact, in this environment, you can talk to somebody on the other side of the room. You can talk to anybody and everybody, even though they're not literally sitting beside you, and all at once. So that's a very big shift in the way conversation happens. The next point is that everybody can be an initiator. So you saw the example there where one of our students brought an example of something which we'd never heard of. So allowing students to initiate means that they become content producers. They start conversations. In IRE, the teacher always starts the conversation, starts the classroom discourse. But in this environment, we could allow that students can start discussions as well, and we might prompt them in one way or another. And finally, is this point about learning analytics. We can parse everything that's happening with learning analytics. We can see how, you know, who's talking, are they talking enough? Who are they talking to? Because they're each got their little @ symbols where we can see the networks of conversations going on between people and work out what the meaning of those patterns might be. So in a way, classical classroom discourse was entirely ephemeral. You know, the teacher talked, it went up in the air, it was invisible from then on. But now with these new environments, with learning analytics, there's a new visibility to who's contributing and who's not, and who's saying what and who's not, and who's talking to whom. And if you want to read some more about some of these ideas that we've been talking through here, you'll find this book, E-Learning Ecologies, and also we have a Coursera MOOC where we talk this stuff through as well.
We've just heard Bill talk about a space in CG Scholar that we've called community. Now, that word was chosen not for arbitrary reasons, but it has an intention about the kind of sociality, designing a space in the online environment that facilitates sociality in the way that Bill describes, in the multiple ways that Bill describes. So bringing humanity into the technology, bringing a sense of actually people who are constructing knowledge together, who are sharing knowledge, who are thinking about what each other has said. The design of this particular space is pointing to that direction. So that's one thing that I want to say and add to what Bill has said. The second is that it's done right beside the space creator that where the production of the text or the project and the final outcome of their knowledge emerges after a number of iterations. So these two sit beside each other, but they also interact in powerful kind of ways as the learners engage actively and noisily and continuously with each other and with their teacher and with other experts and with the substance the content that's being shared, which they bring in the teacher office, and the content which they produce.